When did you start working at DIL?
I came to Ajax in 1942 in November.
And how long did you stay for?
Till today.
No, I'm sorry. How long did you stay at DIL for?
How long? I worked at DIL until the plant closed. And perhaps this is the place where I should tell you that I was privileged to type my own quit slip. I worked in the office, and when the war was gearing down and the necessity to fill great quantities of shells was becoming less and less, they started closing down production lines, closed down production until the only line in production was line 1. And that is why I worked until August of 1945, because that was when production ended. And because I was in production, and because I was in the office, and my job was to do production reports and this kind of thing, I think personnel got bogged down, and they brought down a lot of typing for me to do, which included typing quit slips. And so I typed my own quit slip.
Do you remember how much you made when you started and when you left?
I believe that the pay could have varied depending on where you were working. As I recall, I started out at 54 cents an hour, and that was when I was working in shell filling in line 3. I filled the shells with cordite, and that would be the casing end. And line 3 made a 3.7, filled a 3.7 shell, and so it had a tall brass casing which had to be filled with explosive. So we filled it with cordite bundles, which were yay big around, reminded us a little bit of spaghetti. And those bundles had to be weighed and tied to the exact amount of explosive that was required. So there were groups of girls in rooms weighing and tying the cordite. And as I recall, I think I started at 54 cents an hour. And then I took a typing course during the winter, I believe. And the area supervisor came down the line one day and said to me, "I understand you can type." Well, the typing course was the pits, and I mean, it was an old manual typewriter, and I couldn't do it without looking, so it was a search and peck method. However, I said to him, "I have a card that says I can." And I got a job in the office typing production reports, searching and pecking. And I also got a raise. I think it was 4 cents more to do that.
Do you remember the security of the plant? All the security precautions?
The security of the plant was probably one of the most important functions. For example, there was a guard at Highway 2 and what is now Harwood Avenue. Nothing went past there without his observance. And then to get into work, when we came to Ajax, we were, before we began to work, we were briefed on safety, the fact that we weren't to talk about what we were doing, the fact that this was a very vital part of the war effort, and we were fingerprinted, we had a medical, and we were photographed, of course. And the photograph was on we were given a payroll number, and our badge bore our picture and our payroll number. And you didn't get anywhere without that. If you showed up trying to get through the time clock to go to work with no badge, you would be turned back, because security was very, very tight. You had to always be wearing your badge. And there were guards on all the time clocks, there were vehicles that went in and out, but they were only authorized vehicles. And of course, they had to show their authorization slips and their identification before they were allowed to go in or out either. There were there were around 300 or 350 guards, I believe, and the location, the area. I looked the figure up. 2,846 acres of land was fenced with an 8-foot fence, wire fence, and then barbed wire, strands of barbed wire around the top for security. And there were, what did they call them? They were like huts along the way, elevated, and they were lighted, and the men who went in shifts in those huts carried rifles with live ammunition, of course. So it was very, very tight security. I lived in women's residence, and in order to get through there, through that gate, you needed to show your identification. You couldn't get into the residence without it.
Go ahead. Can you hear all that in the background? Yeah.
Too much highway noise?
No, it's our father. Yeah. There's hands in the trees. Okay.
Yep.
Do you remember the security at the plant?
Yes, there was tight security at the plant. We had, I think, about 250 to 300 guards on duty round the clock, 24 hours a day. There was a guard at Highway 2, for example, Highway 2 in Harwood, and that was the only entrance, the only way into the plant. And when you went through to work, you had to be wearing your badge. And now, to get this badge, when we came here to be on payroll, we were given a payroll number, we were given the medical, we were fingerprinted, and our picture was taken. And then, without this badge, we needed to wear it here. You couldn't get into work, and the people who were walking in, of course, and most of us walked in and punched the time clock. We had to go past guards always, and the people who drove in, which weren't very many, and they had to be authorized vehicles. They also had to wear identification, and they had to have authorization slips to drive their vehicles into the plant. The plant was completely fenced, 2,846 acres, completely fenced with a high wire fence, 8-foot fence with 3 strands, as I recall, of barbed wire on the top. And every 200 feet or so, there was an elevated hut. These were manned by men with loaded rifles. The fence was well lit, so that there was opportunity if they saw anyone trying to get in, that they would be able to. I have heard some rumors. Some people have said to me, well, some people trying to get in and this kind of thing. Well, that may be so. I didn't hear that. I don't believe they're invaded, but that kind of things were not noised around anyway, so possible.
What was the number one reason you worked at DIL?
Came to work at DIL was limited.
What was the number one reason DIL?
Probably the reason that I came to DIL was because opportunity arose. I thought about going into the service, but a lot of us were doing that. A hospital in Saskatchewan at the time, $30 a month, and my board. Had to pay for my room and had to share the room, of course, in order to do it at all. And so $7 each month went to portion of the rent. And the board was provided in the hospital cap, which meant that even on my day off Thursday, I had to, if I'd get down there to the hospital by 8 a.m. So that was a dead end. And I think it was called, well, it's like our employment insurance people. They asked everyone 18 and over to register. We were asked to register. Of course, I expect they were thinking about. And so from this registration list, they were calling people, females, to see if they would be interested in coming to Defence Industries Limited to work. Now, teams of men went out across the country. Alec Russell and Cease Robinson were the two men who came to Saskatoon. And they were calling up people and making an appointments, and nothing ventured, nothing gained. I went down to see what they were talking about. And they told me that they would pay my way down here, provide my transportation, provide living accommodations for me when I got here, pay me, and as I recall, 54 cents an hour. There would be a cafeteria where I could get my food, a nice place for me to live. And this is a big venture to come from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to some unknown place in Ontario. They would only tell us it was near Toronto, and they wouldn't tell us anything more. The job was to fill shells and or whatever else was needed to be done. So it was really an unknown thing you were going into. So I checked with my dad, and he had lived in Ontario and Quebec as a child, I think, and he said, I can't think of a better way to see Ontario. If you want to go, why, you should do that. And it seemed, too, the patriotic thing to do. They needed people to help fill these shells, and it was most important that we win this war. So I guess that was my reason for coming.
What do you remember about the trip from Saskatchewan to here?
Exciting thing. We had, I lived with my uncle before I went to work at the hospital, before I rented a room of my own. And this aunt and uncle were always very supportive, and the auntie packed me a great big lunch and said, you won't be able to get any food on the train, you know, and dress warmly. And those were two wise pieces of advice. So the train was to leave at the station at 5 o'clock in the morning, and so Uncle thought it would be if he took me in my trunk before he went to bed. So we did that, and I checked into the train late night, and so I was on the train quite a few hours before we ever pulled out of the station. I don't know how many people can get into a coach, but there were 3 of them, 3 coaches full of girls. And so we set out, and I don't know how many people have traveled across the country by train. It's gorgeous. Canada is a beautiful country, but trains always take the back road, through the bush, behind the houses. So there's not, we saw a lot of scenery, but it gets kind of boring after a while, particularly when you have no place to lie down and the day passes into night. And they did bring along a pillow and I think a blanket. Other than that, we were pretty well on our own. Didn't know anyone else on the train. I didn't know anyone that was coming here. Someplace they picked up coaches full of servicemen. And for 4 or 5 hours, things were really interesting until the people in charge got wise and made the girls coaches out of bounds. And the things were pretty dull after that. It took 3 days and 3 nights to get here.
If you spent 3 days on the train, I guess you met a lot of other people from Saskatchewan got to know a group of people from there. Did you stick to that group when you got here, or basically separated?
Actually, I didn't meet a lot of folks. The girl that I sat beside, we introduced ourselves, and there was a girl across the aisle who was by herself, very by herself. Did I?
Did you socialize with other women from out west?
The train trip was rather lonely. I think you have to think about our backgrounds. We were basically small community people, and I don't think we socialized terribly well. We didn't. These days, I would have had a deck of cards. I would have had some things to do, but we weren't wise enough. None of us thought to do that, and so I think we were all very worried about what we were getting ourselves into, and so we kind of didn't share a great deal with anybody. We were pretty quiet along the way down, and the girl that I sat beside was from North Battleford, and she and I roomed together. It just seemed obvious. We had so when it came time to be assigned rooms, we took rooms together, a room together. The girl across the aisle lived outside of Saskatoon, and she was very lonely and appeared to be running away from. And she joined, and we became a threesome. Really, the only fast friends I made during that trip.
Sounds like going.
Sounds like going to camp. Yeah.
Don't talk to anybody. I don't want to go. Okay. Why did you stay in Ajax after you left the IL?
When the war was finished and my job was finished, well, we had a house, and the Central Mortgage and Housing had decided that the houses needed a little work done on them. And my husband had his quit slip had been typed before mine, so he had already found employment outside of Defence Industries Limited. He was working for the company that was spray painting the houses. And when I say spray painting, I mean spray painting. They did windows, doors, and everything else. they weren't terribly efficient, but the houses did look brighter. And so he had a job here. If you will probably remember, women, particularly married women, were not in the workforce prior to the war. And so it was a common thing that there wasn't, with all this influx on the market, there was no job anyway. And they paid us unemployment insurance for a certain length of time. And my husband was rather old-fashioned and felt that if he couldn't earn a living, then he had to earn the living. It wasn't a good thing for me to be working. So he didn't want me to go looking for work, and I did not. But he was working, and so we just stayed here. He went from that job to another type of painting job and drove to Toronto from here to work until he was not able to do that anymore.
What was your best memory of the time?
It was a good time. Once we were here, and into the way things went, trying to sleep in the time. Remember, we worked 3 shifts. We worked 8 to 4, and the next week we worked 12, and the next week we worked 12 to 8. The only day we didn't work was Sunday. We fit midnight on Saturday night and went back night on Sunday night. And that's when you did your shift change. So sometimes you had a little bit longer off than others. So you were trying to sleep in the daytime and this kind of thing, which was a little tough. But other than that, it was a good life. The work was not difficult. Sometimes it was dangerous in some areas, but actually it was good time. We made lots of good friends. We had lots of activities going on. There were dances at the rec hall. There were movies at the rec hall. There were church evening services, or even fireside, we called them. That was called them. And every Sunday night there was some kind of a program, and just everything. The social director, life very interesting if you wish to participate in those things.
Okay. Robert? Sure. Okay, so you're a memory of a low.
Well, we arrived, and we came from a that was cold and very dry. I was adequately dressed for that climate, a coat and something that, leg warmers, which came up above the knee here to keep your legs. Women didn't wear slacks a great deal, and warm boots and everything. Well, with me, when I got here, it was kind of dingy, and we had a time getting used to this climate. And all these nice warm clothes I had for minus 30, simply is minus 5 stuff, and I'm talking Fahrenheit because we used Fahrenheit in those days. And now it was chilly and damp, and we had a heck of a time getting used to the climate. And Christmas, you remember we left, I came in November, and so the first Christmas was probably the saddest day of our lives. And guess what? It was raining. The grass was green, what there was, and it was raining. And here we are, the three of us, the three musketeers. The girl I roomed with was Dorothy, so we called her Dot. And the girl was Dorothy, so we called her Dorothy. Didn't get confused. And me being Louise wasn't a problem. So the three of us are out trudging in the rain with our umbrella. And if you ever saw three more miserable people in your life. They had a lovely Christmas dinner, and they had activities at the recreation center, and they did their best. But we were away from family, and in those days you didn't pick up the phone and call home. There was no phone in my home in Saskatchewan in the first place, and in the second place we would never have thought of spending money like that.
What was correspondence like between home? Did you write a lot of letters? Or?
Yes, I wrote home very faithfully, and my family responded, and we kept in great touch by letter. But I don't ever remember getting any other type of communication. The phones, there were no phones, of course, in the residences. The house mother might have had a phone, but certainly no one else did. And the payphone, there was a payphone out on Harwood Avenue here, but we have the same kind of racket, of course, and not very serviceable. So the way we use phones today and the way we used them then are quite differently. But the mail went through. But I can recall that there was a time when you couldn't buy a postage stamp in Ajax. Had to go to the village, to Pickering Village, to buy a postage stamp. So.
What about that? I read that there was a problem with the post, the mail. That as more and more people got here, the post office, the management decided that they should have their own post office here.
Yes, eventually they did have their own. By the time I got here, we did have our own post office.
Do you want to go into that?
Don't know a great deal about it. Yeah, really don't know when it started or anything. I haven't enough information. But by the time I came, we did have our own post office. Yeah, and we could buy postage stamps, but I remember somebody saying to me, "You think you've got it bad? We couldn't even buy a postage stamp when I first came here."
Okay.
Continue, Robert.
What about, you met your husband here?
Yes, the peak employment at DIL was 9,000, and the majority of those people were female, because the men that came to work here were either in management, and most of them came from, I understand, from General Motors, because General Motors stopped manufacturing cars, and so some men were available for this job. They transferred people in from other places too, people in management. And then there were some folk who didn't go to war for religious reasons or people who were not physically fit. They called them 4F, and they were not suitable for service. And there were people who were in services necessary, like agriculture. Farmers weren't required to well, we needed to keep people on the farms and this kind of thing. So there were some men around who weren't in the service. And some of these men worked 2 jobs. Some of them worked on the farm. They kept their farms going and then drove into Ajax to work their 8-hour shift all the time. My husband was in the 4F category. He had varicose veins in his legs, and he couldn't pass the, and bad circulation, I guess, and he couldn't pass the physical. So he was very disappointed when his friends went off to war and he was left behind. And he was working in the, at the time that they were employing people here, he was working on the fruit farms in the Niagara district. And he came to work at Ajax, and I'm not exactly sure when. I was working on line 3, and I got a transfer to line 1, and then I was doing the cordite weighing cordite in 116, and that cordite was just little bitty stuff, and you got it out of it came into our section in a metal container, and this man wheeled it in from something called the cordite house, which was completely separate from the line. He had to bring it along a catwalk and wheel it in and dump it into a bin so that the weighers could get it out of there. So we didn't reach in with our hands. What did we use? I think we used some kind of a scoop, and scooped it out and put it in the little weighing dish until we got it exactly right, and then slipped it down, and the girls would put it into the 40 millimeter casings. And the man who was wheeling the cordite in was Russell Johnson, and I was weighing. So it wasn't a big problem for him to sort of pause while, from the time he dumped the cordite into the container that I was dipping it out of, it wasn't impossible for him to stop and exchange the time of day before he left. And eventually we were married in 1943. And we met in 43 and we were married in 44. It was in 1943 that I first met Russell. And at that time I was living in the women's residence and he was living in the men's residence. And he moved out of the men's residence and lived in a room over on Cedar Street. And my girlfriend Dorothy and I moved out of women's residence. I don't know if the time coincided, doesn't matter. And we lived on Glynn Road in a room. And so this was, as I recall, late winter of 1943. And we lived at 4 Glynn, and we had a room with kitchen privileges. So we got to share the icebox and the bathroom and then we had a bed sitting room where we lived, and we had a little hot plate thing that we were allowed to use to cook on. So it wasn't the Ritz, but we got along fine, and or we thought we were getting along fine, but the landlady there for some reason decided not to have roomers anymore, or decided she didn't want us. I'm not sure. But anyway, one day she said to me, you can't live here anymore. I'm giving you notice. However, there is a lady down at 51 Glynn, Mrs. Chevry, and I've been talking to her, and she's interested in having some roomers. So we came down and spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Chevry, and they're happy to have us, and we were given the back bedroom of a small 4, and kitchen privileges. And because everybody worked shift, and the Chevrys were also employees of DIL, but they were in different departments altogether, and but we didn't work the same shifts, so often we wouldn't see them for a while. They had a little girl called Charlotte. She was around 10 or 11, and she was around, often making it difficult for us to sleep when we were coming home off the midnight shift and trying to sleep. And she had I don't think they called them PA days, but anyway, for some reason she'd be off school, and anyhow, that was a small matter. And so we got along just fine. The Chevrys enjoyed us, and we enjoyed them, and we didn't get noticed to move again. So, and then when our first Christmas here, our second Christmas in Ajax, and our first Christmas here was really exciting, so much different from the Christmas past, because my husband and his line foreman went out cutting Christmas trees, and from some place they found a small Christmas tree. I have a picture of it. It's about this perfectly formed little tree. And they brought it home and gave it to us for Christmas. And we set it on a card table in our room and decorated it up with a star and the whole thing. And we just had it was just such a different Christmas. We had become acclimatized, and we had made friends, and the Chevrys were like family. And so that was our second Christmas here. And the strange thing was that as time progressed, and Russell and I were making plans to marry, and Dorothy had a change of job, and she found it necessary to go and live in Toronto. So about June or so, she gave notice and went off to live in Toronto. And my husband and I, my fiance and I, were planning to be married in August. So he said to Mrs. Chevry, "Be all right if I move in?" And she said, "Fine, after you're married." So anyhow, that was how it worked. We were married on August 29th, 1944, and he came to live. He moved his treasures from Cedar Street over here, and we had the back bedroom and kitchen privileges. And that worked fine. But unfortunately, the Chevrys got a transfer, and we came home one day to find out that the Chevrys were leaving, and they rented the house, and we paid them rent. So now what do we do? So my husband went over to Central Mortgage and Housing. The office was on Harwood Avenue, just across the street here, and he went over to talk to Mr. Finley, and said, well, this is the situation. And Mr. Finley said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, but there's a great long waiting list. I'll put you down at the bottom." So he came home pretty disturbed, and then so as soon as he could, he went to see our superintendent, the person who in charge of personnel on the line, and just explained to him that, if we had no place to live, then we wouldn't be able to work here. And the Central Mortgage and Housing didn't see fit to let us have the house, even though we were living in it. And so it was only a few days, and word came, because my husband said, "You can have my notice and my wife's, since she won't be working here either." Well, I don't know if that was blackmail or not, but anyhow, only a few days later we got notice that to come in and sign as tenants, because we had been accepted as tenants, with one provision, that we had to share the house. We had to find somebody to share the house with. So we found Sophie and Johnny McDonald, who were friends of my husband's, and they came and took over the front bedroom, and we shared the house till the end of the war, and the McDonalds went their way, and we stayed here.
What was your job on the lines? What did you do on the lines?
When I first went to work at DIL, I was assigned to Line 3 in the cordate room, and all of the rooms had numbers. So the cordite room was 316. So I worked in 316, and I preferred to stand, so I was weighing cordite. I didn't always get to weigh cordite, but mostly I was weighing. And then I took this typing course. Am I repeating myself?
Well, it was came in with another question, and you got into it a little bit. So
Yeah.
I just thought I'd ask.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you can just go through the process of how you cut the cordite. You have that little
Just talk about the cordite room.
cordite, yeah.
Yeah, just talk about the cordite room. Because I did talk about line
Yeah.
1, cordite 2. Okay, go.
Okay, go ahead.
When I was first sent down the line, I was sent to 316. Now the lines were, someone else has probably told you this, but there was line 1, 2, 3, and 4. And each line was filling a different type of shell, or doing a different, they weren't all filling shells, some of them were filling detonators, which is a different thing. But each line had its own job to do, and line 3 was producing 3.7 shells. So they're tall fellows, stand about this high, and the casing, then the casing end, about so perhaps, and that casing was filled with cordite, and the cordite came into us in a box, and it looked like white spaghetti, somewhat, except it was solid. Spaghetti's hollow, isn't it? This was solid. No, spaghetti's not hollow. Anyhow, it was about the size of a pencil, a little smaller than a pencil, and solid and white, and you know, about that long, I suppose. So you dug in there with the things you were supplied with were gloves and a cutting knife. I just happened to have my cutting knife. We were not supposed to keep anything at the end of the war, and we had to turn our uniform and everything back. But I still have my cutting knife. It just didn't get in with the rest of the stuff. And so when you were weighing, you dipped in and you got a handful of cordite and you put it on a scale. Now these scales were calibrated by inspectors. You didn't have to go 2 pounds 4 ounces. You went to the black line, and that they were very carefully checked. Every so often the inspectors would come in and check again. So you didn't ever have to know how much it weighed. That wasn't important. What you had to do was get it to the black line. So it took no skill. Actually, it was very boring. But you know, we sang songs and told yarns and anything at all to stay awake. Have you ever tried to stay awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and watch the black line, up to the black line, please? You know, pretty tricky. If I wasn't weighing, I was sitting on a chair, long tables, with a series of chairs, I would think 6 or 8 women on either side of what we would call a boardroom table, and it had a trough, and the person who weighed would put this loose cordite down into the trough, and it would go along, and the persons who were tying had, well, it wasn't really string. It was more like cloth about yay wide, and we had this available to us, and we had to tie the cordite 3 times, there, and once in the middle, and it was important that these ties be done exactly to the same strength, that's not the word I'm looking for, the same, so that you had a nice, even, tight bundle. So the tying was a bit of an art, and then the knot was important too. So you had this, and as you made your knot, you cut it with this cordite knife like this, and so that was then it went down the table in a bundle. Somebody at the end put it in the casing, and one of the big jobs down there at the end was to put a little dollop of aluminum foil on the top. We were never quite sure what the aluminum foil was for, but someone said it was to clean the barrel of the gun after, so I don't know. whether that was true or not.
Okay. Were you ever concerned about the danger of the job?
There were facets of Defence Industries Limited that were dangerous, more dangerous than others. There wouldn't have been anything in the cordite room that could have caused a problem except static electricity. We were very carefully clothed and very carefully schooled in safety. We had to wear coveralls. We could not wear clothing with things that would generate electricity. Our shoes could be better defined as boxes. When I came to Ajax, I wore a 7.5 shoe. When I finished at DIL, I wore a 9.5 shoe. And I attribute it to wearing these shoes that we were issued, which were flat, no shape, and your foot just spread all over the place if you stood on it long enough. So anyhow, but they had no, they had leather laces and no nails or anything in these shoes. It was so that they wouldn't cause any static electricity. We weren't to wear bobby pins in our hair, which was the thing to do in those days, get your hair in with combs and bobby pins. You could wear none of that in your hair. Your hair had to be completely covered with a bandana, which went around this way and tied in a knot at the top. And the coveralls that we wore covered our clothing. We were not supposed to wear anything that was silk or anything that would generate any static. England. And I don't know whether you've ever heard the song, "Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me." And we took that quite seriously. I was not out shopping for someone else because he had gone off to war, and while we didn't have any firm commitment or anything, he was the item of the hour sort of thing. And I wouldn't have thought to look around for somebody because that just wasn't done. These days, I don't know, you turn your back for 5 minutes and they're hunting for somebody else. But
especially 10 years ago. 10 or 20 years ago.
But
late 60s, early 70s.
yeah, but I know the social aspect of life here at Defence Industries Limited was probably the same as any army camp. There were because we did consider ourselves to be part of the war. The shell filling plant was the largest shell filling plant in the British Empire. We knew our importance. If the boys didn't have shells, they couldn't win the war. So absenteeism was something that we just didn't do. We went to work if we possibly could go to work. No one missed shifts unless they absolutely had to. And so for the social life, I think, when you consider that there were a lot more women here than men, maybe the ratio 9 to 1, didn't I do well to find a husband? Yes. The girls danced together. The big bands came in, and Jitterbug was the thing at the time, and they raised the roof and they had a good time. But they were not particularly expecting to be able to link up with one particular person because the marriageable men were at war. They either were married men at war or they were single men who had left someone behind with a promise of coming back. And I think that the girls in those days, and I could be very wrong, but I think the girls in those days were more anxious for that person to come home and more anxious for the next male than they were busy shopping to see if they could find a better item along the way someplace. Does that do it?
Do you remember the naming of Ajax?
When I came to work here, this was called Pickering Works. Later, it was referred to as Defence Industries Limited, and in some of the literature we have, we'll find Defence Industries Limited. In the historical board records, someplace is quite a large sign that was taken down off the railroad station, and it says DILCO, which I assume was the way they did the sign. I think it meant DIL Company, Defence Industries Limited Company, maybe. But anyway, it says DILCO, which when I pronounce that, it's DILCO. Anyhow, those were some of the names that were tacked onto this place. And in the management felt that we should have a different name, and there was a contest held asking people to submit a name that they thought would be fitting for this town. And I don't have the name of the man who actually made the choice. I did have it, but I don't have it this morning. And the town was actually named, as everybody knows, after the ship HMS Ajax. And the comparison was made that the HMS Ajax and the flotilla, the Exeter and the, what was the other one? Achilles, did a very, very courageous thing by fooling the German battleship into defeat. And I think that we were needing something really to hang on to let us know that we were important here. And so I believe that's why the theory is that because of the courage of those ships and because of the courage of the people here in Canada to make this work as well as it did, and as brilliantly, really, to fill all of those shells and ship them off, I think the two things coincided, and the reason Ajax was chosen was because of the courage of the British flotilla, and particularly the HMS Ajax.
Remember what name you put in?
I didn't hear you.
Do you remember what name you wanted?
I didn't enter.
Oh, you didn't.
I have no imagination, I guess. I didn't enter.
Not Louise Johnson, you know?
Okay. Just wondering if you wanted to go over anybody you knew at that time. Like you mentioned your roommate. The director of programming, I believe, was Harry Brock at that time. Do you remember any stories about him?
Harry Brock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he sort of led the...
The recreation hall was the focus of the social aspect of Ajax. We had a beautiful big recreation hall, hardwood, everything was hardwood floors, of course, and the best of materials went into the building of this place. And Harry Brock was a very able recreation director. And how he was able, I suppose because it was a war effort and people made a real effort to come and entertain us the way they did go overseas and entertain the servicemen. So we had big bands like Mark Kenny and others whose names escape me at the moment, but the bands came in, not big bands twice a week, but we did have dances, and the other things were theatrical productions, bowling. There was a library there. There was a refreshment booth. I don't believe they sold alcohol, but you know, pop and stuff. And there were ball teams and all kinds of things to keep us occupied on our hours that we weren't working. Harry Brock, of course, went on to run he owned a bowling alley on Harwood Avenue North after the war, and I worked with Harry and Ray Brock up there with the junior bowlers for years, and tried to teach kids how to bowl. And so Harry Brock was very well known and much appreciated in our town. So time goes by, but friendships only deepen in many cases, and some of the folks that I knew and enjoyed being with during Defense Industries days are still around. My friend Dorothy, the one that shared my room here, died of cancer 15 years ago at least, so I miss her. But Evelyn Nishaw is still very much in the picture. She and her husband Art lived on Cedar Street, and their son was born there. And then shortly after that, Art got a job in the shipyards on Vancouver Island, and they moved out to Vancouver Island, where 3 more children were born. And during this time, we were corresponding, and the correspondence and pictures of the weddings and so forth went on, and so we kept in touch through the years. And when I went on a trip to Calgary, it included a trip to BC and to Expo and to Vancouver Island, and I skipped the tour for a few hours and went and had dinner with Evelyn, whom I hadn't seen in 37 years. And it was just like we'd never been separated, because we had kept in touch, and we had I needed to see the children, and she took me to see them. They all live around, and I saw 3 out of 4 of the children and their children. And last year the phone rang, and it was Evelyn, and she said, "Are you going to be around in June? I'm hoping to come for a visit." So she showed up for 4 days last year and was here, appropriately enough, when the town, the historical board, hosted the 50th anniversary of Defense Industries Limited down at the Recreation Center. And she was here, and she was the person who had traveled the furthest. Now, she didn't even know this was happening when she made arrangements to come, but it was just lovely that she was able to be here for that. And she did run into some other folks she knew too, who had come back for the reunion. And this year, as part of my trip to Alaska, I am going to fly to Vancouver Island. I'm escaping the tour again and flying to Vancouver Island to spend 4 days with Evelyn. So you're able sometimes to keep friendships up, but it's a two-way street, you have to remember. If you write a letter and don't get one back, you're lost.
Okay.
How are we going to get into it?
Maybe you can talk about the residences and then housing as well. Like
Okay,
what
the single. When I first came to Ajax, as I mentioned, I lived in the residences for women, and these were beautiful places, especially built, of course, for that purpose. And they housed 100 girls, 2 girls to a room. And then that looked after the single people who worked at the plant. The single men were housed in a separate residence, residences located approximately where the Ajax Plaza is now. As I recall, the women's residences were fenced in. I'm not sure whether the men's were, and I never went over there, so I don't really know. But anyhow, as that looked after single people, but what about the married families who came, the men and ladies who came here and brought their families with them? 600 houses were built north of what is now 401 Highway, what was then called the Queen Elizabeth Way, and was gravel. These 600 houses still are here. To my knowledge, none have been demolished. A few have been built that are not wartime era on land that was not used up at the time. There are two at the end of Glynn that are brick houses, obviously built at a different time, but they were not there during war days. There were 600 wartime homes, and these accommodated people like the Chevry family that lived at 51 Glynn, and the man, wife, and little girl. Usually the family worked odd shifts. The man and wife didn't go on the same shift, so that someone would be home to mind the children. So they worked opposite shifts. And so these 600 houses housed only DIL workers. And at the end of the war, the word was that these houses would be taken down. There wouldn't be need for them. And that, of course, turned out to be not right, because as the men came back from the war and they turned this shell filling plant into a university campus, the some folks moved out because they went back to their farms or went back to a different kind of employment. Other people, like us, we stayed. The folks who lived next door to me, that gentleman went back to his job at General Motors, but a lot of the folks around were university people. They came here to finish their engineering. They were in the Army or services. They came out of the service. They were going to go to university in Ajax, and therefore they needed housing for their family. So it was then used for the university housing until they didn't make anyone leave. They didn't give us all notice and say, you guys have to go because this ex-servicemen are going to use this. They didn't do that, but if you moved out, then the servicemen were on a list. The ex-servicemen and people who were going to university. And some of those people are still here, but not a lot, because as they got their degrees, they then went off to work someplace else. They couldn't find employment probably close. But I still visit and was pleased to be among those who celebrated the 50th anniversary of Vonnie and Bill McCaw, who used to live across the street. So, you know, lots of friendships formed over the years with people. Now, the McCaws moved away because his job was someplace else, but some folks are still here because their employment kept them here. And as the university closed down, the demand for housing was so great that it just made sense. They would not tear these houses down. And in 1951, they put them up for sale. And again, the person living in the house had first dibs. And we decided that, yes, we were living here and we may as well stay here for now. And that was in 1951. And it's now 1992 and I'm still here. So anyway, I have the deed to the house, and this particular house, I've seen different figures and people have different memories, but this particular house, the total price was $2,995. We had to pay 10% down and we didn't have it. So we were able to borrow, though, from my daughter's baby bonus fund, enough money to make up the down payment. And we had a 20-year mortgage at 4.5%. So, you know, it was a wise buy, and the house has been very adequate for us.